I wonder how often we attempt a drive-through healing. When you think about it, we have so many things that we do, so many tasks that we have to achieve. Well, tonight, if you hadn't have guessed, we wanted to focus on knowing people, and God's been speaking to us as a staff team over the last week or so, just about knowing people. And we had a great staff meeting yesterday, and talking about this, and I wanted to kind of continue that on just briefly tonight before we break and have some supper and hang out together for a bit. God has clearly called his people to two main things, right? Two commandments: to love him and love our neighbor, okay? And I feel that in our culture and in our day and age, it is incredibly difficult to love somebody without knowing them. Weirdly, we are the most connected, perhaps we ever have been, and the most disconnected we may have ever been. You know, I can tell what 10 of my friends ate for dinner on the weekend, but I might not know the names of all my next door neighbours. I know the names of maybe some random celebrities' kids, but maybe I don't even know the school that my neighbours' kids go to, or a health issue that a close friend of mine has been battling with. As a church, we feel that we have been asked by God to be a door of hope through Jesus Christ in a fragile and uncertain world. And right now, in this season, one of the best things we think we can do is to know people better. One quote that Christy has shared a few times with us staff recently is from David Augsburger, who says this. He says, "Being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person, it's almost indistinguishable." That's a powerful idea, isn't it? And so the conversations that we have with each other and with the people who attend our church on Sunday or who visit here during the week, passing through, or utilize one of our business areas, or that we deal with, or maybe we deal with outside of Door of Hope kind of sphere in our own lives, in our workplaces, in our schools, those conversations are incredibly important when it comes to knowing people. And that's why we talk a lot about rich conversations at Door of Hope, and conversations with each other that go deeper than the weather and the footy score. Conversations that have depth and a richness to them, that bring life, that bring strength, that bring courage into another person, and where we listen to one another really well. But one of the problems with a rich conversation is that it can be incredibly inconvenient. Don't you agree? You know, quite often, they take time. And even worse, sometimes they're spontaneous. So inconvenient. I don't know about you, but when I have really important stuff to do, it can be really inconvenient to stop and have a conversation with somebody. And we had as I said, our staff meeting yesterday, and Christy asked us the question that really challenged me, and I feel like I can ask us here tonight. Are you interruptible? I ask this of myself. Am I interruptible? Jesus was. Let's read a story that we're very familiar with in Luke chapter 8. It says, "On the other side of the lake, the crowds welcomed Jesus because they had been waiting for him. Then a man named Jairus, a leader of the local synagogue, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come home with him. His only daughter, who was about 12 years old, was dying, and Jesus went with him. And as Jesus went with him, he was surrounded by the crowds. A woman in the crowd had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding, and she could find no cure. Coming up behind Jesus, she touched the fringe of his robe. Immediately, the bleeding stopped. "Who touched me?" Jesus asked. Everyone denied it, and Peter said, "Master, this whole crowd is pressing up against you." But Jesus said, "Someone deliberately touched me, for I felt healing power go out from me." And when the woman realized that she could not stay hidden, she began to tremble and fell to her knees in front of him. The whole crowd heard her explanation, why she had touched him, and that she had been immediately healed. "Daughter," he said to her, "your faith has made you well. Go in peace." While he was still speaking to her, a messenger arrived from the home of Jairus, the leader of the synagogue. He told him, "Your daughter is dead. There's no use for troubling the teacher now." But when Jesus heard what had happened, he said to Jairus, "Don't be afraid. Just have faith, and she will be healed." Jesus had a really important job to do, didn't he? A job probably far more important than most of us could claim to have. He had the job of going to a very important leader's house and saving a little girl from dying. That's a pretty important job. And yet, he was interruptible. The woman with the bleeding condition touched him and was healed, but there was actually no reason for Jesus to stop, if you think about it. It was pretty much a drive-through healing, right? I mean, by the time Jesus stopped, the woman was already healed. You know what I mean? Why did Jesus have to stop? She was already healed. He stopped because there was a conversation to have. Jesus stopped just briefly, but he stopped to have a profound, rich conversation with this woman who had been healed. He allowed her to speak and say her piece. And then he called her daughter, letting her know how important she was, how valued she was. And then she explained that her healing had come from her faith, so that she could understand what had happened and the people around could understand what had happened. You see, Jesus didn't stop, funnily enough, so that he could heal the woman. He stopped to have a conversation. I wonder how often we attempt a drive-through healing. When you think about it, we have so many things that we do, so many tasks that we have to achieve. And at Door of Hope, we've got so many things, great things that we do. And all of us are involved in one way or another in putting these great programs on, or courses, or serving our community in storage, or in the foyer, or in church on Sunday, or our kids, or our youth, or all these incredibly important things. But I wonder how often we think that all the people that benefit from all those wonderful things, that's enough. That all they need to do is benefit from the things that we do, and that we actually never have to actually stop. That it's a drive-through healing, that we can keep powering on and concentrating on what we've got to do and all the tasks and all the things that we've got ahead of us, and we don't have to stop and have the conversation. Are we interruptible? Are we willing to release just enough control of our own timelines and our own schedules and our own plans that if the situation calls for it, we can stop and have a conversation with somebody? And another question, do we have enough grace to allow others to be interruptible? Do we allow each other that freedom to be interrupted as well? Maybe that's something you can help me with. Maybe that's something you can keep me accountable to. Maybe it's something you want to work on as well. We've got another team night coming up at the end of July in a few months. Wouldn't it be great if we could reflect back on the last couple of months and really be able to testify to God helping us to be more interruptible to the people around us? Whether you're serving on a Sunday in this room or out in the kids, or whether you're serving on stage or at the back, or whether you're serving during the week like Marianne does. I wonder what it is that you might have to tweak to just level up on your interruptibility. And the fear is that we become less productive, isn't it? That's my biggest fear. Will I end up just talking to everybody and never getting anything done? Well, remember what Jesus said in this situation? He said, "Don't be afraid. Just have faith and she will be healed." I believe that when God has set us a task to do, he also gives us margin for interruptibility. And actually, it's us that fills that margin with other stuff. God will always give us margin to be interrupted. Jesus did it. And I pray as we seek to know people better that we will learn the art of interruptibility. That we will learn the power of an interruption. And that we would trust in the one that said he would build his church. And the gates of hell not prevail. And trust that having a conversation with someone is not going to put that in jeopardy. Sometimes we worry about the littlest things, and yet God has it all in control. One of the best ways to know somebody really well is to pray with them. And so that's what we're going to do now, just for a few minutes. Just gather in like pairs or little trios. And if you're in the Crave team, you've done this before. And then just pick one thing. It might be a praise point that you're just really praising God for at the moment. Or it might be a prayer point that you're really seeking God for at the moment. Just one thing. And we just share that with the other person or the other couple of people in that group. And then we're just going to spend a few minutes praying for that. If you're joining us online, feel free to put it in the chat and we'll be praying for you as well. And then I'll come up and close, and then there's some supper for us. So why don't we spend a few minutes in prayer?